Hello guys, welcome to this session. And in this session, we will basically be discussing how to move forward with our application. In the last session, I put us through how to actually create a model and how to run migration. And also, I have to apologize for the last recording because I noticed that I was not capturing the process of creation of file. And this is basically because I recently changed my screen, which is much more bigger than the previous screen, and I'm still trying to understand how to actually set it up. And I hope due to that setup, you guys will actually enjoy this session and the upcoming ones, and you will also be able to see things much clearer than the previous sessions. So what I've done is I've introduced a makefile, which is basically a file. A makefile is basically a file that you can use to actually run commands. And this is basically just to make running of command easier for myself. Instead of having to type all of this, I can easily just type make.run.dev. So I don't need you to worry about this. Just I'll attach a link, maybe a JIT link to where you can actually download and include it in your application. So I don't want you to worry about that. So to start with, the first thing we are going to be doing in this session is to refactor our main.go, because I noticed that the way we are currently reporting error, there is no way for us to actually catch an error if an error occurs while we are loading our env file. I know some of you might probably have noticed it. So you notice that after loading the env file, we are instantiating our new MySQL connection. And during the process of initiating the MySQL connection, um we are not actually we are actually overriding the error that might have occurred at this point. Just to show you, for people who do not understand what I am saying, let's go to our command line, and I'm going to remove the .env file. I'll just copy the content of the .env file, and I will remove it. .env. Now that I've removed the .env file, if I try to run the application, run dev, so as you can see, my run dev is basically just running the go run.cmd as we have been loading. Have been running. So you can see now that an error is actually being raised in the .env file, error loading.env. And this error is basically coming from where we are loading our SQL data, this error loading env file. So in order to avoid that, in order to actually get the error that is happening, because if I come here and remove the SQL, or let me even just say, let me do this. Let me remove this and just return error. I will just return nil, and I will return error. Right? If I load this again, now you see that in our main.go file, there is an error, no such file .env or .env, no such file or directory. That's the error that we are getting. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to go back to our main file, and I'm going to, let me create that file back, touch.env. Right, I'm returning it. I'm pasting our code. I'll go back here, then move this error away from here and move it here. So that way we immediately catch the error as at the point of this instantiation. So if we go back now and try to run our application, so you can see now that our application is now starting successfully and our database is actually loading. So let's move to today's implementation. So for today, we are going to start with our register route handler, and I'm going to call the file that will be holding anything authentication auth handler. In our auth handler, we are going to have what we call register handler. I'm just going to copy this and paste, and I'm going to call this register user, or let me just call it register handler, handler, and so in our register handler, what we'll basically be doing is we are going to accept some requests from the user, and we are going to create the user, then do some other things during the process. So the first thing we are going to have to do is we need to bind requests body to we need to bind the request body. Then after binding the request body, we need to validate what we've binded, validation. Then we can do some other stuff. Now, how do we bind a request body? That is the big question you must be asking right now. So the way we are going to bind a request body is basically by, so let's go back to the the Echo framework documentation. If you check under binding, if you want to just come under guide and you see binding. So binding request data is crucial part of a web application. In Echo, this is done with a process called binding. This is done with information passed by the clients in the following parts. So there are a couple of ways the clients can send us information. They can send it through the URL path parameter. They can send it through the URL query parameter. They can send it via the header. They can send it via the request body. But what we are concerned with is the parameters sent through request body. And that is basically what we are going to be going straight to. Now, the way we bind requests is using tags. And there are different forms of tags that are available or provided to us by Echo framework. We can either bind using query, param, header, JSON. But what we are interested in is using the JSON tag, right? Um, so the request body are decoded based on either application.json, it is either application/xml or application/form URL encoded. And this is basically for when you are sending a form data. Now, how do we bind a request coming into our application? So the first thing we are going to do is let's even create a request. What does a request look like? So let me say, to create a request, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file and I'm going to call it requests. So in the request file, I'm going to have what we call auth requests. And the first file that we'll be having in the auth request is the register user request. Register type struct. It will be a struct and it will be register user request. Our register user request will be accepting some couple of parameters. That is, the parameters will be accepting from users that want to register on our application. The first parameter we'll be requesting is their first name. Now, I told you we are going to be using a tag called JSON. What has happened here now is my application has automatically completed the code editor I'm using has automatically completed this for me. So we don't need this for now. So another thing that we need is we need the last name of the user. You can see it's basically just giving me options. Last name of the user. We also need their email address. Then we also need their password, which is basically what they will be using to log in into the application. Now that we have created this binding, the next thing we need to do now is go to our route handler, and we are going to initiate the payload. So in order to actually bind, let's go back to the documentation. You have different methods that are specific to each type of binding. You can bind to the body. This we take a look at. This we pick data from when you pass a JSON or when you pass a form data or when you pass an XML. This one will basically just bind to data from the query param, and this will bind from path param. We are going to see everything during the course of this course. So I'm going to start with this, right? And I'm going to copy some other code. I'm just going to copy this. Right. So I'm going to use this here because I want to bind to a specific path. So this will be available in c.default binder. Oh no, this you can only access this in the uh echo echo yeah default bind. And here, so what we are doing is we are binding request. Now, how do we pass? You can see that what this bind method is expecting now is any type. It can be any type. But the purpose of binding our request is basically to replace the content of our payload with what is being sent from the client. So let me initiate our register user handler. So I'll call it payload. And our payload will be new. So this will return a pointer for us. This is a function from Go itself. I'll call it register user request. So as you can see, you will see that this is actually returning a pointer. And since it is already returning a pointer, we don't need to pass this in like this. The only time we probably need to do this is if we are passing this in like so. Register request dot register request, and we are passing it in like this. Sorry, like this, and we pass it in. Or let me just start. Let's start with that. So now that we've actually done that, the next thing we want to see now is let's fmt.print, or let me just use the logger provided by for us. c.logout.info, and we're going to print our payload. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to return a response here. Let me just take it right to the end and call it good request. Right. So let's come back to our So the first thing we need to do is we need to register the new handler. And where do we register? We register it right here in the route file. So I'm just going to copy this line. Don't mind me, I'm a lazy developer. I do a lot of copy. So I just post, then I access the register handler. If you have done it, you can see that we are associating it to the handler. So that's why we have access to the method. So I'm going to call this /register. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to send, okay, let's start our application. So if we start our application and run, so you can see we are getting good requests. Then let us inspect our application. I can see we are not getting anything right here. I wonder why. So let me try to pass in some data. Let me say first name. I'll call it something. Now, let's see if we are getting anything. Okay, we are not getting anything. I don't know. We are binding the body, we are passing in the payload, and we are getting good requests. So that means, okay, let's go back to the documentation. Bind body. Try to see. That's quite strange. I expect this to work. Let me pass it in like this. And let's go back and rerun our application. We are still not getting the data. Let me take a look at this. So let's see. So if we check our Postman documentation, so since where we are picking our data is from JSON, then that means we have to pass our data through JSON. So if you open your Postman, create under the request, create under raw data, select JSON, then send this data. Now, if we inspect our what we've actually logged, you will notice that under online 17, we are logging the message alone, which is basically what we are sending to the front end. So this is basically how we extract the data sent to us from the clients in the backend. So let me just put in the rest. Let me say last name, email, password. So last name, email, and password. So I will just say, let me call this code with C at gmail.com. Then let's password the password. So if we hit this now if we inspect, so we can see that in our message we have code with C, we have the Gmail, we have the password. So that way, using this bind method, we have been able to extract the data coming from the front end. And if an invalid data is sent, an error will actually be sent. So you can see now bad requests. And if we look at this, we can see that we have 400 error looking for the beginning of blah, 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 due to basically bad requests, right? So if the JSON being sent is not valid, an error will be sending an error to the front end. So that is how we actually extract data from the body or requests being sent into our application. So I'm going to end this session here. And in the next session, what we are going to do is we are going to learn how to actually validate the request coming into our application. Because right now, if I pass just anything like tgmail.com, it will still pass, we still get good requests. We need to be able to validate if it is a correct email, if the last name is correct, if the first name is correct, or maybe there is a maximum number of this and that that we are expecting. So see you in the next session, and I hope you've actually enjoyed this session.